to the Daily Allegory through astrological divination. Today's story is about a toxic family's long-running con beginning to collapse when investigators uncovered that they allegedly stole a man's identity, then used a relative to impersonate him in court while branding him mentally unstable and codependent to secure an illegal power of attorney and quietly funnel his property and money into their control. With help from a corrupt physician assistant who was accused of altering medical records to strengthen the narrative, they gained access to his accounts, opened new accounts in his name, and transferred funds through a web of transactions they assumed that nobody's going to trace, because they've convinced themselves he's too unaware to fight back. But the pressure spikes when the FBI obtains verifiable proof of a coordinated conspiracy and begins hauling people into interrogation rooms, confronting them with original documents, photos, videos, and financial statements, and testimony from protected informants and undercover investigators who have been tracking the group's careless trail for months. Even the man's mother, implicated in the scheme, fails to dodge the accountability by invoking her cancer diagnosis for sympathy, and the family's coincident confidence dissolves into panic as the man's easy target image shatters, revealing a quiet, formidable protection around him that goes beyond ordinary power, moving into shadowy overlap between the elite influence and something almost supernatural. Today's story is called the Aquarius File. They never said steal inside the house. They used softer words: secure, protect, things like manage. The kind of language that let them sleep at night while their hands moved through someone else's life like pickpockets in daylight. The target was family, which made it easier. Family meant access. And access meant plausibility. They watched him the way predators watched a wounded animal. Convinced his quietness was ignorance, his patience was a blindfold. They rehearsed a story they would tell the world: that he was unstable, that he was codependent, unwell, too fractured to be trusted with his own signature. And because they were practiced liars with practiced smiles, they didn't just tell it in conversation. They built it into paperwork, into medical files, into courtrooms where fluorescent lights made everything look official, on paper anyways. It started with identity: a missing piece of mail here, a copied document there, password recovered under the guise of helping. They slipped into his name like an old coat and discovered the miracle of modern theft. Once you control the narrative, the system will do the rest. A relative close enough to share facial bones and cadence began to show up in places the man had never been, sitting in court hearings with his posture, his throat clear, his "yes, Your Honor" delivered with borrowed certainty. The relative's performance was clean and calm, the kind judges mistake for authenticity. And behind it, the family's central weapon wasn't brute force. It was credibility laundering, turning lies into facts by getting them stamped witnessed and filed. They needed a diagnosis to seal it, though. That's where the physician's assistant came in, an infection wearing a name badge. He didn't rewrite records like a villain in a movie. He made small edits the way rot spreads through wood. Subtle, believable, and placed where no one would look twice. A symptom exaggerated, a note inserted, a behavioral assessment framed in loaded language: mentally unstable, dependent, at risk. The kind of phrasing that collapses a person's autonomy with few clinical keystrokes. With those altered records, the family petitioned for power of attorney as if they were rescuers. They painted themselves as caretakers standing over a broken man, while the real care was for deeds and account numbers. The illegal power of attorney arrived like a key. Then came the transfers, and at first, they were careful. Small withdrawals, quiet wire movements, disguised as routine management. New accounts opened in his name with addresses that weren't even his. They moved money the way smugglers move contraband, in pieces, through corridors, with a smile when the bank teller asked, "Hey, how are you today?" They began eyeing properties next. Paperwork got corrected, titles got updated, refinancing initiated under signatures that looked almost right if you didn't know the man's hand. They told each other the same comforting myth: he's dumb, he's unaware, he'll never notice. And even if he does, who's going to believe him at this point? Pile it on and load somebody with so much chaos that it's perceived externally as psychosis. But the man had been born with a kind of stillness that wasn't passive. It was Mars and Aquarius, action guided by cold clarity. Discipline that doesn't announce itself, war fought with intelligence instead of noise. He didn't rage publicly, he didn't beg. He watched, he documented, and he waited. There was a stellium in Aquarius, Venus, Mercury, Sun, Pluto, and Mars. A mind built like a sealed vault, emotions refined in their strategy, love expressed as protection, words sharpened into evidence, identity fused with transformation. His silence wasn't surrender, it was the beginning of a countdown. When he finally moved, it wasn't with threats, it was with a file. That was the family's first mistake. Thinking quiet meant weak. Their second mistake was being sloppy. People get sloppy when they're comfortable in their pattern behavior, their cycles, their repetition, things that they have done before and always go back to, because each criminal always visits the beginning of the crime scene. It's always in these CSI shows that you see. The criminal always returns, always, whether that be to a physical location, to a habit, or a routine. It's unavoidable. They left trails everywhere because they believed no one would ever look. They reused IP addresses. They used the same phone number on his accounts. They opened mail in their own kitchens, throwing it away in the garbage. It's easily found by cops at that point if you throw mail away. It don't belong to you. They texted about transfers like teenagers planning a surprise party. Their arrogance made them reckless. And oh, how reckless can arrogance make somebody? And recklessness always produces a pattern. Pattern recognition, pattern behavior. Two key elements. The FBI loves patterns. It began as a whisper in an office, the kind of case that's supposed to stay local, supposed to be smoothed over by favors and family connections. But something about it, too many overlapping fraud flags, too many inconsistencies, made it metastasize into a federal investigation by people who actually wanted to do their job, the people that value their career and public image. Mars trine Uranus in the 8th, sudden disruption and hidden money, as a lightning strike in the vault. One day the family woke up still believing that they were invisible. The next, they were being watched by people who did not blink. Undercover investigators slid through their orbit like shadows, documenting conversations, photographing mailbox thefts, pulling bank footage, tracking the money's path through every crooked corridor. Protected informants, people the family thought were loyal and were not. There's no honor amongst thieves, remember that, guys. Began speaking into recorders with calm voices, trading secrets for safety. A case file thickened page by page until it became absolutely irrefutably undeniable. The pressure changed in the house before anyone said a word. The mother, central and smiling as always, convinced of her own righteousness, tried to anchor the family with performance. When the first rumor investigation surfaced, she played the role she knew always worked. Martyr. Cancer, she said. Treatment, she said. Don't you dare stress me, she implied, as if illness were a crown that could absolve anything. In their minds, she was untouchable because she was suffering. Poor lady. Suffering was supposed to purchase exemption, but the federal world doesn't worship your tragedies. The first interrogation wasn't loud. It was polite. A knock, a card, a request to come in for questions. The kind of calm tone that makes your stomach drop because it means the other side already knows the answer. Those guys don't come knocking unless they already know A to Z. One relative went in to clear things up and came out with a face that had forgotten how to lie. Another laughed nervously and said this was all a misunderstanding, then stopped laughing when an agent slid a folder across the table and opened it like a judge opening a sentence. Inside were original documents, backups in case something goes wrong. Not copies, not rumors, hard paper with hard ink, signed and notarized and filed in legal counsel's cabinets. Almost forgotten. Photos of the impersonator arriving at the courthouse, videos of account withdrawals made at the ATMs near their house, financial statements that map the transfers like a pulse, text messages printed out in black and white, their jokes turned into confessions. Gotta watch them group chats on WhatsApp and stuff. Just because it's encrypted doesn't mean it's not touchable. Untouchable. Doesn't make it untouchable, I should say. It's actually more accessible because of forensics. They can follow those things. They're called digital footprints. Boy, they can implicate you. Now, testimony summaries from informants who described a plot with bored precision as someone reciting somebody telling a grocery list, eggs, bacon, bread. They paid me to do this because we were trying to set him up, and so they paid me to plant evidence in his car or in his apartment, and then they were going to make a phone call, and then he was supposed to go to jail but didn't, and this was the plan type stuff. The family stared at their own handwriting and felt something inside them crack. You can argue with people all day long, but what you can't argue with is documents. Even forged documents analyzed by forensics is evidence. Very incriminating evidence. Mars conjunct Pluto at a sensitive degree in the 10th house. Public exposure as a weapon. Power meeting consequence in the open for all to see. Especially if you enjoy public spectacles or humiliating people. That karma's going to come back. Boy, is that going to smack you hard. Now, the mother tried to summon sympathy again. Tears, trembling hands, soft voice. Always bent people. It didn't work this time, though. Agents don't flinch at crocodile grief. They've seen it too many times, heard all the stories, heard all the tales. They've heard it all, seen it all, done it all, been through it all. They don't care. They're reading you like a book. She realized for the first time that her story had lost its spell. Panic is a kind of haunting, The family began turning on each other. Whispers thick in hallways, doors closing too hard, phones clutched like weapons. Everybody suspected everybody else. Someone tried to delete bank app histories and found the accounts were already frozen. Someone tried to fix the medical record trail and learned that the system logs every edit like a footprint in wet cement. You can't get rid of that. That's an archive. And that's kept separate from the main access point that some people have permissions to on those platforms. They always keep a backup archive that only a data administrator would have access to. Even hacking that would actually be quite challenging because those are usually maintained on a hard file rather than a soft file and just left in the cloud. The physician's assistant, so confident in his badge, started sweating through his collar when he realized the forensic audit could show exactly when the records were altered and by whom. He began practicing lines in the mirror, then stopped when his own reflection looked like a stranger, and all the while, the man stayed quiet. He didn't posture. He didn't give interviews. He didn't rage online. His protection moved in a gray space the family never really understood. Elite, invisible, and frighteningly organized. Like a wall you only notice after you've already hit it. It was influence, timing, access to the right eyes, even eyes in the sky. Mars sextile Neptune in the 9th, the unseen operating through institutions, the spiritual bleeding into procedural. Rumors followed him, this man they tried to scam. Something about protection that surpassed even military. Something about shadows that handled problems without announcing that they existed. Whether supernatural or simply the terrifying power of preparation. The effect was the same. The family felt hunted by something that they couldn't name or see. At night, they started dreaming of signatures, a pen dragging across paper, a hand that wasn't theirs, the sound of a stamp hitting the form like a gunshot. They woke with dry mouths and a taste of metal, and it wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was the body recognizing consequence, or impending consequence. Then came the final turn of the blade, especially if you're doing death by 1,000 swords. Mars sextile Lilith in the 12th. The hidden feminine shadow, the buried truth, the taboo exposed. It wasn't survival. In a small room with a clock that ticked too loudly, he finally admitted what everybody already knew. He pretended to be the man in court. He signed as him. He repeated the lines they coached him to say. He did it because they told him it was family duty. Because they promised it would be quick. Because they promised no one would get hurt. The agent across the table didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When the confession hit the file, the case snapped shut like a trap. The mother tried one last time. She requested a meeting. She wore a scarf like a halo. She spoke softly about illness and stress and forgiveness and how sick she is, as if those words could rewrite financial fraud trails and forged identities. The response was simple. Evidence doesn't care what you're going through. It only cares what you did. It don't give a shit if you're sick. It don't give a shit if you were stressed or whatever. That does not give you the right or justification to do things to other people or coordinate strategically with a community at large to target people. It doesn't exonerate you from doing so. That is terrorism. Domestic terrorism is what it's called. The man watched it all unfold from a distance, like someone observing a controlled burn. He had learned the Aquarius lessons early. Emotion is powerful, but structure always wins. He let the system do what it does when it's finally forced to look. The family, who once thought they were clever enough to make reality bend, discovered the opposite truth. Reality bends only until it breaks back. And it always snaps back, especially if it's bending the wrong direction for the wrong reasons. Balance is a imperative aspect there when trying to manipulate reality. You must internalize what you're externalizing, otherwise reality is not going to respond kindly. By the time the indictments landed, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a sealed box, like a coffin. Every room held an echo of their own voices plotting. Every hallway felt watched. Every phone call carried the dread of someone listening. They weren't haunted by ghosts. They were haunted by receipts. And the most insidious part, the part no one could put on paper, was how the man's silence stayed with him. He never threatened. He never begged. He never performed. He simply existed like a cold star, waiting to heat up and go parabolic. Distant, steady, unmovable, and catastrophic to anything foolish enough to orbit too close. Because they didn't just try to steal his identity. They tried to erase his agency. And in the end, what erased them wasn't magic in a theatrical sense, of course. It was something far darker and more cinematic. The moment the truth, backed by documents and watched by professionals, finally became louder than the lie. That's all I have for you. Let's hope we're not out here stealing identities and selling people's information on the dark web and forging documents and trying to commit perjury and stealing properties or other people's money. That would be wild, because you always end up going to jail for that. It's a federal crime, and I imagine if that happened to anybody, they'd be on top of it, and charges would be pressed accordingly, with no remorse, empathy, or anything to that nature. Good luck otherwise, though. But I'll see you in the next one.